Hey everybody, how are you this evening? I am Jennifer Kirby, Managing Advocate from Compass Rose Disability Advocates, and we are proud to be bringing you a new show. I apologize to all of you who were following this channel back in March. I know I promised I would be giving regular updates on all the legislation and disability-related news with the new administration. Unfortunately, the level of things got a tad overwhelming, and I will be honest, depressing. So I ended up focusing my spring on helping our immediate clients. I hope everybody had a wonderful summer, but it's September now, so welcome back to the year, and we are doing a new feature. Every Tuesday night, we are going to be hosting a quick question and answer session where you, either our clients or other folks out there, can send in questions and answers, and I will do my best to answer them. So these are usually going to be short and quick, depending on how many questions we have. Right now, we haven't had anybody submit anything yet. So this first episode is going to be a perennial favorite of mine. What is the difference between an IEP and a 504? And is a 504 actually legal? Because out there on the internet, there are many, many people who think an IEP is the gold standard and a 504 isn't even worth the paper it's written on. This is not actually true. So let's get into it. And if you like this video, please like and share because the more subscribers we get and the better content we have, hopefully we might even get some YouTube sponsors. And any revenue we get helps us to make services as affordable for folks as we can. But for now, let's get into the difference between an IEP and a 504. Okay, so as I said, they are both very legal documents. The reason that 504 gets a little bit of what I'll call the bad rap is because it is not as clearly regulated in terms of format and deadlines as IEPs are. Basically, the term 504 plan comes from the law, Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. This particular act requires that accommodations be provided to people with disabilities by any entity that receives federal funding. Section 504 specifically governs schools going from K to 12 all the way up through college. So that's who it covers, and it covers anybody with a disabling condition that substantially impairs a major life functions. There is not an exhaustive list of major life functions. The law was specifically designed not to do that because there's just too many medical conditions out there to list. So when you see a list, know that it's just a representative list. It is not like Social Security as far as only if you're on this list are you going to get the benefit. The question is always, okay, number one, what is your condition? And number two, what substantial life function does it impact? So that is where 504 comes from. Actually, if you read the law closely, there is actually no requirement that a 504 plan be written. There's just a requirement that students be provided the accommodations they need as laid out in the 504. And I know that's a little counterintuitive. If you think to yourself, there isn't even a rule that they need to write it down. No, there isn't, but there is a rule that it needs to be followed. So that is why all districts do have a written form of a 504 plan. The federal government does also require that an evaluation be done for a 504. way back in the day when I started being an advocate, you could get a 504 plan by basically, say, bringing in a doctor's prescription and saying my student has diabetes or ADHD and they need these accommodations. Now you need to provide that medical documentation, and the school is encouraged to do an evaluation that's about as comprehensive as they would do for an IEP. But mainly what they need to look at is, does it substantially impair a life function? And to be clear, that life function does not just have to be learning. It can be breathing, speaking, walking, concentrating, things like that. So you're going to see a lot of kids with chronic medical conditions that qualify for a 504 that may not qualify for an IEP. And the reason for this is you can need an accommodation in any number of areas, including recreational activities, clubs, things like that. And you might be totally fine in terms of academics. And that is one of the key differences between an IEP and a 504. To be eligible for an IEP, it's not that it's a better document, quote unquote. It's that it's more rigidly defined who qualifies for it. To qualify for an IEP, a student must not only have a disability, but that disability has to require specialized instruction in order to be able to progress through the curriculum. And specialized instruction means that you need a different curriculum, say a curriculum at a lower level presented, or you need to be instructed in a completely different way, or you need supplemental physical or occupational therapy, or things like that. Now, some school districts will add physical and occupational therapy to a 504 if they don't see the need for writing an IEP goal, because to have an IEP, you need to have a need that needs to be addressed through an annual goal, and that annual goal has to be talking about what skill you're going to develop differently and how you're going to get there by the end of the IEP year. So that's where it gets a lot more rigid in terms of who qualifies for what. So you could potentially still get support from an occupational therapist for something on a 504, but it may not be a need where the occupational therapist, say, needs to sit down and teach you how to type or write differently or something like that. So that's where you could potentially get some therapy services on a 504 instead of an IEP. But as an advocate, I always figured the IEP is the one where funding is provided, or at least in the old days it used to be. It's a little hard to say what's going to happen now with special education funding. So if I were a district and I had a kid that I knew needed therapy, my inclination would be to look very closely at an IEP. But some districts, in some cases, choose to do a 504 instead, and that can be perfectly acceptable depending on the circumstances. So anyway, 504s, generally they are meant for students who can handle the regular curriculum that other students are doing, but might need accommodations to be able to get through the day. Either if it's because they have ADHD and they need sensory breaks, more visuals and more reminders, or they have a chronic health condition where they need to do more snacks and drinks during the day. They might need to use the bathroom more frequently. They may need to actually have some forms of medication on their person as opposed to down at the nurse's station. Sometimes that can get a little dicey as far as how that goes. But all of those things are examples of what would go on a 504 per se. So it can be a variety of issues. In addition, there's A common misunderstanding I've noticed this last year with some of our school administrators who think that 504s are only for academics, kind of thinking in the same terms of what a lot of IEP goals are for. IEPs are not exclusively for academics either, but those will tend to be the most common types of goals one might see on an IEP. A 504, if you need the accommodation to access things in school, that means not just academics, but it can mean extracurriculars, clubs, things like that. So recess even, if you need an accommodation for recess, that is something that could potentially go on a 504. So what it covers is far, far broader than what goes on an IEP, and there are a lot more students that would potentially be eligible for 504s than are eligible for IEPs. So if you look at it in terms of volume and who it covers, it's actually a stronger, a more comprehensive law than special education law is. I would say they're equally as important. They just cover different needs for different types of students. Now, we do have some kiddos that have an IEP and a 504. You can legally do that. As an advocate, I kind of don't see the point because there's a place right on an IEP for accommodations that would typically go on a 504. So I don't see the need to make it two separate documents. Some districts, however, will choose to do that. If say a student has two different disabilities and one is significantly different than the other, they might say, well, this goes under the 504 and this goes under the IEP. So it's a little weird, but it's perfectly legal to do if a school district chooses to do it that way. Another difference between 504s and IEPs, which kind of leads to the idea of 504s really aren't as good or as real, is that they don't have as tight deadlines for being evaluated or for completing documents and things like that. Writing an IEP is very prescribed by the federal government and the states as to timelines. 504 is not so much as well defined, but best practice is that it should be reviewed at least once a year. In terms of enforcement for IEPs and 504s, it's different. 504s get enforced at the federal level, and IEPs tend to be enforced at the state level, either through what's in Ohio called a procedural complaint or by filing for a due process hearing. 504s are investigated by an office called the Office for Civil Rights of the U.S. Department of Education. That is unfortunately my only sad change to my explanation of this that I do all the time. That particular office of the U.S. Department of Education, along with many other parts of the U.S. Department of Education, has been severely curtailed. Since I last spoke to folks watching this channel in March, they have indeed reduced the 12 regional offices in the country down to 5. And I say that and note that there was a large backlog of complaints that they were looking into before the offices were cut. So even though there have been assurances that efficiency will continue, efficiency was not there in the first place because they were understaffed. So I really cannot say how long it would take to get a 504 complaint investigated at this point. But I have discovered that our regional office for Ohio, which used to be in Cleveland, is now in, yes, Denver, which shows us how far the definition of region is going these days. So it's a questionable enforcement process these days, but honestly, that's a little bit the case with IEPs as well, because as the federal government makes cuts, those cuts will trickle down to the state government. And I know our particular state office for exceptional children seems to have had a lot of staffing shortfalls during the spring and summer. So let's just say, in terms of enforcing IEP or 504, it's going to be interesting to see what's there. But we as advocates here at Compass Rose still fully support our families in that process. And we will work with whatever we can do with the local district, because obviously it's more preferable to resolve things that way than doing a complaint anyway. But if we need to do a complaint, we remain fully committed to helping parents enforce that complaint in whatever ways are still available to us. And as usual, and as I said in March, if you are a person with a disability, a family member of somebody with a disability, or anything, any sort of interested party, if you have concerns about the changes that are taking place and how they impact kids with disabilities, I urge you to contact your congressperson, regardless of party, regardless of political affiliation, and just say, kids with disabilities are important. Students with disabilities are important all the way up to the college level. Please make sure that their supports and services are not taken away or changed significantly. The only way we're going to be able to make sure that people know how important this is if we keep getting out there and letting our Congress know how important it is to us. So that's my little plug for enforcing either of them is going to be tricky these days, but we all have to tell all of our government funders exactly how important these things are for kids with disabilities, and that our civil rights as the disability community cannot and should not be disregarded. In terms of some key things to know about 504s that people often don't know, and again, administrators will get confused sometimes, is, as I said, number one, they don't have to be for academics. They can be for extracurricular activities, health needs, anything like that. Number two, another common misconception is that if a student gets A's or B's or reasonably good grades of any kind, they don't need a 504. That is not true either, because again, we go back to the two prongs of 504, which are A, do you have a disability or chronic condition? And B, does that disability or chronic condition involve a need? Does it substantially impact a major life activity? That is the criteria. It's not about do you get A's or B's, because again, that only looks at academics. And even if you did do well in academics, you could still have something like ADHD and still benefit from reminders, extra time, things like that, use of assistive technology. So no, you can't say, well, so-and-so is an AB student already. They don't need an accommodation. You have to look at, do they have a disability and does it substantially impact? On a related note to that, the other piece of that is that a school can't say, well, Joellen never uses this accommodation, so we're going to take it off the 504. Because of that, basically what the rule is that as long as you still have the condition, even if you only use the accommodation maybe once a year or not at all, but there's still the potential that you might need it at some point, because you still have the condition, it is to remain on the 504. And I will tell you right off, school administrators find that incredibly confusing. But all it is meant to be a safeguard to say, hey, this person still has this condition. They may still need this accommodation in the future, even if they barely ever use it. So guess what? It stays on. By that, another thing to know is that schools are supposed to look at whether or not, aren't supposed to look at whether or not your disability, such as, say, ADHD, can be alleviated by use of medication. I had many schools who will say to a parent, well, if you just put them on ADHD meds, then we wouldn't need to give them extra time or tap them on the shoulder to remind them or that kind of a thing. That may be true, but the reason why schools cannot use medication as a criteria is just like doctors cannot prescribe that a school has to write an IEP or a 504. A school cannot tell you whether or not to medicate your child. And there are truly some kids, say with ADHD, that have adverse reactions to ADHD medications, or they're contraindicated with other medications. So, I mean, if your child has heart issues or severe appetite loss because of ADHD medications, or they counteract respiratory medications, obviously you don't want to choose between, am I going to have a heart attack or not be able to breathe or lose a lot of weight, or am I going to be focused in school? You're going to choose life over being laser focused in school by taking medication. So that means, guess what? The school still needs to work with you to accommodate your child's needs. So, in a nutshell, that is the difference between an IEP and a 504. If anybody has follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me at Compass Rose and ask. Our phone number is 419-688-5922. We'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions you'd like me to address, as I said, we're going to be doing this show at least every 2 weeks, possibly weekly, on Tuesday nights around 6 p.m. Obviously, I'm a little late in posting the first one this evening, but we will be getting into the groove. We look forward to hearing from you. No question is stupid. And please, if you like this video, please like and share and subscribe to the channel, because if we get a lot of attention on YouTube, we might get some sponsors or the ability to ask for a small amount of funding to support our work. And every dollar we get from other revenue helps us to consider being able to possibly lower our prices. We are aware that our prices are prohibitive for some people. We do the best that we can to make them affordable. We offer volume discounts and payment plans. I know there's a lot of people out there who wish that we would advocate for kids with disabilities for free. But as those of you who know us know, we are all people with disabilities or family members of people with disabilities ourselves. So the thing is that we all have the same expenses that you do. So that's why we have to charge for our services, because we have bills to pay as well. But the more subscribers we get to our videos, hopefully we can generate some revenue that way, and look at possibly adjusting our prices downwards a little. Anyway, that is our first video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will be back with you guys next week. Again, if you have any questions, please go to our website, look for the brochure right on the front page advertising the show, click on our logo, and send in your questions. Have a great night. Thanks. Bye-bye.